Hey everyone, I wanted to do a quick speed run of a new presentation that Nathan McNeil, one of my co-founders at Baumgar Corporation, sent me, and I wanted to get your feedback of whether you think this PowerPoint presentation does a better job of explaining Bitcoin for people that are completely new to Bitcoin as compared to the PowerPoint presentation I presented on Facebook previously, and I will include a link to the previous one in the comments below as a quick refresher. Okay, so I'm going to try to speed run this because I don't have a lot of time. But this is Bitcoin for normal people. What I'm trying to do in this presentation, which is what I've discussed with Nathan, is explain Bitcoin using concepts that people understand, the concept of a spreadsheet, the concept of software, things like that. But I want your feedback on that as compared to the other way of explaining which was all about, money being easy to use but hard to make more of, and then sort of coming at that from the history of money. So we're calling this Bitcoin for normal people, but you could call this Bitcoin for business people or Bitcoin for average people or whatever. I just want to, get the concepts across of how does this work for average people. Okay, so let's kick off here. First slide is why do we use money at all? Well, money makes it easier to trade. To trade, it's hard, for example, to trade eggs for a cow for a house for eggs. So money sits in the middle and makes it easy to trade. Okay, so let's talk about the US dollar, because that's what we use in the United States to make it easy to trade right now. So most people think about my money, how much money I have, $100. That's the only number most people think about. But there's another number that's actually very, very, very important, which is the second number, which is how much of all the money is there. Because this number is just as important, because how much you can buy with your dollars, which is called your purchasing power, is determined by how much money you have and how much money there is. It's one divided by the other. So for example, if there's $100 that you own and all the money in the world is $1,000, you can buy 10% of all of the stuff that money might be able to buy. Okay, if the money supply increases to $2,000, now the amount of things you can buy with your $100 drops in half, down to just 5% of all the things that money can buy. So all of the money, which is the total supply, can buy all of the stuff. The two have to equal each other. There has to be a ratio there. No matter how much money there is, it still equals all the stuff. So you'll notice as it goes from $100 to $1,000, the price tags all just add a zero. All the money always buys all the stuff. That could be bought with money at that time. Okay, if it helps, imagine the money and the stuff on an island. Basically, no matter how much money you add into the island, all the money still buys all the stuff. So what that means is you need to know two numbers to know your money's value. You need to know your money, and then you need to know all the money. Because $1 out of $10 buys you 10% of all the stuff, but $1 out of $100 only buys you 1% of all the stuff on the island, for example. So prices depend on the total money supply. If you have $10 out of 100, you can buy a cow on this hypothetical island. But if the total supply of money is $1,000, now you can only buy a dozen eggs. You'll see here, going back and forth, if the money supply goes up, what your money can buy goes down. Okay, so how much money is there exactly in the United States? Since we're talking about the US dollar, it really matters because it changes the value of your money down there on your purchasing power. So right now there's about $22 trillion in total. It's called M2. M is in money, 2 is the way they measure it. M2 money supply is about $22 trillion in the United States, which means $100 can buy you a 1-gram set of gold earrings, just to use something very concrete in the real world. So has the dollar supply always been 22 trillion? And has $100 always bought you, for example, a set of gold earrings? The answer is no. The government makes more money out of thin air, about 7% more on average every year, which means what started in 1960 as $268 billion of total money in circulation is now 22 trillion. The total amount of money that has been dumped on this, hypothetical island we're talking about is 75 times larger, 75x. For every $1 that existed in 1960, there are $75 that exist now, which means back in 1960, a dollar, if you had $100 out of that, you could buy 88 grams of gold, not 1 gram of gold earrings, you could buy 88 grams of gold back in 1960 for the same $100. So when that number goes up, when that 22 trillion number goes up, that number, the purchasing power goes down. That number falls, which is why you see prices rising. It's why the price of a Big Mac is up 12 times since 1968. It's the reason the same darn Campbell's soup is 10 times as expensive since 1973. And it's why everything you buy right now, as measured by the Consumer Price Index, the CPI, is 10 times more expensive than it was in 1960. 10 times more expensive. Okay, so, but you might be thinking, but wait, my money, that number goes up too. Like, don't I get a raise? Hasn't that number gone up as well? And the answer is yes, it has, but only about half as much as the increase in the things you buy with it. So the average hourly earnings are only up about 6x versus the things you buy are up 10x or 12x. And so what that means is the average person who's bringing, a can of Campbell's soup and a Big Mac to lunch can now only afford half a can of Campbell's soup and half a Big Mac for working the exact same number of hours in the day. So why don't we feel wealthier when we have more money? We learned this from Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations. Wealth does not consist in money, but in what money purchases. And we've known that all the way back at the founding of America with The Wealth of Nations from Adam Smith. So what's going on here? Well, who manages the spreadsheet? At this point, you might be thinking, wait a second, I thought I just had my money and that's all I had to worry about, but somebody is totally monkeying with this spreadsheet because they're making up all this money, this 22 trillion. They're making it all up out of thin air at about 7% a year, which is making my purchasing power go down. So who manages this spreadsheet? Who's in charge of this? Well, banks keep spreadsheets with the green number. My money on the left, your money on the right, Regions Bank, Trustmark Bank. Each bank records who owns what money. And the Federal Reserve makes sure that two people don't own the same money. They keep track of how much money each of the banks has, and then the banks are keeping track of how much money each person has. And it's actually a big spreadsheet. It's technically Microsoft SQL Server, but it basically operates like a really big spreadsheet running on a really big computer that keeps track of the money. So you might be thinking, but what about that red number? If we understand who manages my money and your money, what about that red number, which is all the money? How does it change? Who manages that dollar number that's making your money lose its value? And the answer is the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, especially this guy, Jerome Powell. They basically can go in there with a mouse, double click on the number, and add money. Now, they do it a bunch of very creative ways we'll talk about, but that's what they do. They change the number of how much money's in circulation, and it's basically mouse click money. They make money out of thin air. Okay, so that is why that red number has been on a tear, going up higher and higher and higher and higher. And if the money supply goes up easily, the purchasing power decreases quickly. Okay, so these are all terms that mean they're increasing that red number. That bottom red number, that means your purchasing power is going down. Quantitative easing, monetary stimulus, open market operations, monetary accommodation, central bank balance sheet expansion, asset purchases by the central bank, bailout financing, debt monetization, zero interest rate policy. That's my favorite. ZIRP. ZIRP is the new policy. Negative interest rate policy, NIRP. Crazy stuff. It all means making money out of thin air that makes your purchasing power go down. Okay, so politicians are supposed to limit how much money gets printed here, and the Federal Reserve is supposed to be responsible. You can guess how that goes. You give somebody a magic money printer, magically they want to print more money. That has never not been the case with humans throughout history. As the number of the dollars goes up, the value of the dollar goes down. And if we go back to 1935, in the last 90 years, the US dollar has lost 95% of its purchasing power, meaning a dollar will only buy you what 5 cents would have bought you back in 1935. 95% of the purchasing power of the US dollar has been lost over time. Okay, so could we tie that number to gold? So people had this creative idea over time, which is let's tie that number to something gold because it's scarce. And then we'll make the paper money represent the gold. So this is the way it used to work. They tried this. They tried to make this work. In fact, if you zoom in on the piece of paper dollar, it used to say, this certifies that there have been deposited in the treasury $10 in gold coin payable to the bearer on demand. Literally, the paper could be exchanged for gold anytime. That way, it was supposed to keep the government from printing too much paper because the people could just exchange it for gold. And of course, they couldn't print, or they were not supposed to print more paper than they had gold at Fort Knox, where the government keeps its gold in the United States. Of course, the government broke the promise. They had a magic money printer. They could print more paper than they had gold. It took them all of about 5 seconds to figure out they could do that, and another 5 seconds to actually do it. And so in 1971, the government broke that promise formally. They had been printing way too much money for a very long time, but people actually started redeeming that money, and they did not have enough gold to cover the redemptions. And so they broke the promise, and they said, you're not allowed to redeem the money. And so they changed it to just say Federal Reserve note. They deleted all the words from the paper money that talked about it being redeemable for anything, and now it's not redeemable for anything. It's just a Federal Reserve note. That's $10. That's backed by nothing that they print out of thin air. So that's what's going on there. So what about a different government? If our government is irresponsible because they magically print out of thin air about 7% more money, mouse click money every year, what about other governments? Well, it turns out other countries' money, is it better? Well, it turns out every country prints money. They all print money. And the US dollar is actually the best printed paper money. This is how other countries' currencies compare to the US dollar. Now, let's remember, over the last 90 years, the US dollar is already down 95%. On top of how much the US dollar has already lost its value, the Venezuelan bolivar is down an additional 99.9% on top of how much the US dollar has already lost. So if you think we got it tough in the United States with inflation that ranges from 4% to 9% up into the teens from time to time, imagine being in one of these countries whose currency is tanking even faster, because these numbers are not how much value has been fallen. These are how much their value has fallen in addition to how much the US dollar's value has already fallen. Crazy stuff here. Crazy stuff. Okay, so does a government have to manage the spreadsheet at all? Is there another way that we can just take the power to magically print money out of thin air and take that away from the government entirely? And Friedrich Hayek actually had this idea. He said, I don't believe we shall ever have a good money again before we take the thing out of the hands of government. And he talked about, we're not going to do that by force, but if we can invent a sly, roundabout way to take government, to take money out of the hands of government, we will once again have good money. And this was a quote, I think it's from somewhere in the 1990s. This preceded the actual invention of this by quite a few years. So we actually have that exact thing. We have the sly, roundabout way that Nobel laureate economist Friedrich Hayek talked about, that this spreadsheet of money could be managed a different way. So what is Bitcoin exactly? So Bitcoin, quite simply, is software that works like a spreadsheet. It runs on computers. And the Bitcoin software keeps track of my money, Bitcoin, with a placeholder number in there, and your money, Bitcoin, with a placeholder number in there. And very importantly, it limits all of the money that will ever be in circulation on the Bitcoin spreadsheet to 21 million. Okay, and the Bitcoin software has rules that are hard-coded into it. One is that you have to prove ownership of that Bitcoin before you can move it, or you can spend it, or you can send it to anyone. And second is that the rules enforce the 21 million limit so that there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin. So let's look at that first rule, prove ownership, to send or spend. So Bitcoin is actually, ownership is protected by an encryption key, and it would take all of the computers in the world a billion trillion years to crack one Bitcoin private key. Now, if you use something like Coinbase, they manage that encryption key for you, that private key for you. If you use something like BitKey, it's actually, you actually manage it yourself in a very creative and wonderful way that BitKey enables you to do that. So if you have BitKey, you're actually managing those private keys yourself. If you're using Coinbase, you're using a username and password, and they are managing that private key for you, which is why it's way more secure to put Bitcoin in BitKey, because then you're managing that private key yourself, and then they have all sorts of ways to make sure you don't lose it, and it's not hacked, and it's not scammed, and all of that. Okay, so the Bitcoin computers running the Bitcoin software connect to each other, and they make exact copies of the Bitcoin spreadsheet. And Right now, there are more than 100,000 computers around the world, including running on satellites, literally in outer space, running the Bitcoin software, all staying in sync with each other, and all that have an exact copy of the ledger. So what happens is if you have the keys, the private key, either a BitKey device or a login to Coinbase, you have the access to a private key that lets you move your Bitcoin. So if you send or spend your Bitcoin, it goes to someone else's. Someone else is whoever receives it. It now reflects in their entry on the master. And then those numbers change on every computer. Within a second or two, all of those 100,000 computers, all running Bitcoin, all synchronized, and all have the latest version of that spreadsheet that reflects the ownership. So what you own when you own Bitcoin is replicated to more than 100,000 computers around the world that run an entire copy of the Bitcoin blockchain. In my case, I have a computer that runs two different copies. I have two different copies of the entire Bitcoin blockchain that I run at my house, and you can do the same thing for less than $500. Although there's no reason to for most people, but you can. It's you can even download the software onto your home computer if it has enough hard drive space. Okay, so how do we enforce that $21 million limit? 21 million Bitcoin limit. So the Wall Street Journal, this was a major headline article. Behind Bitcoin's rally is a simple fact. Supplies are limited. Even the Wall Street Journal says, yep, 21 million. There's never going to be more than 21 million that will ever exist. So all of the Bitcoin that will ever exist is 21 million, and no one can make more. And Bitcoin is hard-coded to disconnect anyone who tries. So if any one of those 100,000 computers that are running an entire copy of the entire Bitcoin blockchain, every transaction that's ever happened in human history, if any of them tries to change that rule, they are forcibly disconnected and orphaned from the network. So the other Bitcoin computers say, if you don't say there's 21 million, you can't play with us anymore. And they're literally disconnected and ultimately banned from the Bitcoin network, leaving all the other computers that are playing by the rules. So there are more than 100,000 computers enforcing that rule that there will only be 21 million. And that 21 limit can only change if everyone on the Bitcoin network agrees. All 100,000 computers. Otherwise, whichever agree that, hey, we're sticking with 21 million. Otherwise, those 100,000, whichever, whoever tries to break the rules is just kicked off of the network. Okay. So including you, if you run what's called a Bitcoin node, which is a little computer that costs less than $500, or the software on your computer, even you can have a veto power to make sure that nobody ever changes that 21 million limit. But you don't need to worry about that because there's 100,000 other people already worried about that for you, including me, to make sure that that 21 million Bitcoin limit is never changed. Okay, you can veto changes to the $21 million limit. With politicians, they decide how much money to print out of thin air. They decide, and you don't. Bitcoin gives you an opportunity to, if you could stop that money printer, you would. Bitcoin gives you an opportunity to stop the money printer because you have a veto right as a Bitcoin user to make sure there is never more than 21 million. And even if you don't run one of the 100,000 Bitcoin computers that runs the entire thing, as a Bitcoin user, if you are using Bitcoin, you are endorsing that 21 million limit as well, just by using Bitcoin itself. So the value of Bitcoin is volatile. It's volatile because people are trying to figure out how quickly Bitcoin will be the future monetary system of the world. Just like in the early days of Amazon, if you roll back to the very beginning of this, way back in 2010, and you told everybody exactly what Amazon would be in 2025, then the stock price would immediately jump up to more than $1 trillion, and it would be a very stable stock. But that's not what happens. If you go back to 1999, nobody knew if Amazon was going to take over the world of e-commerce. Nobody knew if e-commerce was going to be a huge deal. The same thing is happening here. All of these ups and downs in the journey of Bitcoin are people trying to figure out how fast is Bitcoin going to become the new money that we all use? How certain is it that that will happen at all? And how quickly will that happen if it is a certainty that will happen at all? And with each of these bumps, you see people saying, oh, it's right around the corner. Nope, it's going to take a little while. Oh, it's right around the corner. Nope, it's going to take a little while. Oh, we've arrived. Everybody's going to use Bitcoin tomorrow. Nope, it's going to take a little while. All of these ups and downs, even though Bitcoin has been the best performing asset of the last the last decade. No other asset has performed better as far as major assets in the last decade. It is volatile because people are still trying to figure out how quickly are we all going to use Bitcoin. And right now, only about 3% of people in the world own any Bitcoin. 3%. That means 97% of the world does not own any Bitcoin. So as you can imagine, it's a bit volatile because we're so early in the adoption of Bitcoin. One day, Bitcoin will be very not volatile, but at that point, the price of Bitcoin will be millions of dollars per coin, and it will not be volatile because everybody in the world will be using it. But until we get there, it will be volatile. But that volatility, that all those ups and downs tell us that there's a lot of upside left for the asset. Okay, so now you have a choice. You can choose between sort of the Microsoft Excel version that the government controls of money or the Bitcoin software version of money that there will never be more than 21 million. Money in the dollar spreadsheet, the US dollar spreadsheet is losing value every single year. Money in the Bitcoin spreadsheet is gaining value, even though it's volatile in the long term. Over time, it eventually always goes up. So Bitcoin is that better money, and you have the ability to adopt that better money. And for the first time in history, take away anyone's power to debase your currency. That means to print more of the currency you're using so that the currency you're holding is worth less. That has been a problem throughout the entirety of human history, that no matter what it was that people used as money, someone somewhere was trying to make more of it out of thin air, and that was resulting in the money that people held in their hands being worth not as much. So Bitcoin is that better money. It solves the problem of your money losing value for the first time in human history. It solves it beautifully. It solves it brilliantly. And that is the story of how Bitcoin is better money. Okay, so I want your feedback on this because I had also done a presentation on, I'll stop sharing real quick. I had done a presentation similar to this one about, let me pull it up here, about how it's essentially the history of money. Let me see if I can find it. Here we go. It's essentially the history of money, and I talk through, and I'll post a link to this in the comments, but let me share this momentarily here. It is this presentation. Okay, so in this presentation, we talked about, and I want your feedback on which one you like better, the one I just went through or this one. I'm going to speed run this one just so you remember what's in it. But we talked about money, prices rising. We talked about how good money is, some of this is overlap. Good money is easy to use, easy to store, easy to spend. Bad money is not. The sort of the main theme of the previous spreadsheet, or sorry, previous PowerPoint was this concept. Money is easy to use and hard to make more. And we've been on this quest throughout human history to try to find money that is easy to use and hard to make more. We talk about seashells and glass beads and grain, the pendulum swinging back and forth. We go through the history of money. Again, you can go watch this version. We talk about gold. We talk about how gold was, hard to use, but at least it was limited. We talked about, I'm going to just flip very quickly through some of these. You can go watch the other version. But this version of the PowerPoint that Nathan McNeil put together really focuses on easy to use and hard to make more, and how we've been on a quest for money that is easy to use and hard to make more. And I'm wondering whether you liked this one more, the easy to use, hard to make more, or the one I just went through in detail that really looks at Bitcoin through sort of the lens of who controls the spreadsheet. But this is the one from before. Would love to know if you thought this one was better than I'm flipping through very quickly. Again, there's some overlaps in slides between the two, but I just would love your thoughts on which one you liked more. And again, I'm speed running this, but you can click the link in the comments if you want to watch my presentation of this actual one. I'm just speed running this as a quick reminder of what was in this one so that you can make a decision and give me feedback on, did you like the one I did a few weeks ago that was all about easy to use and hard to make more, and how Bitcoin was the very first money in history to check both of those boxes. Literally this one checks both boxes. The pendulum swings both ways at the same time. Did you like that one? Or did you like, this, I should say, the one I just did about with spreadsheets? Or do you like this one that's all about easy to use and hard to make more? Let me see if there's more in here. I think that's the highlights. Yeah. Okay, so I just want to know which of these presentations you like better. Again, if you want the detailed version of the other one, I will post it in the comments of this video. Would love your feedback on this. Part of it is I'm trying to decide which of these two presentations to cover at the event on March 18. And we're going to do a live event, and we're also going to Facebook live stream it. And so Nathan McNeil is working on an updated version of the PowerPoint for that event. And I need to tell him which version to update. The one that focuses on Bitcoin as a spreadsheet and who controls the money, or the previous presentation from a few weeks ago or a month or two back that focuses on money being easy to use and hard to make more. I would love your feedback on which of those approaches you think is easier to help people understand what Bitcoin is, how it works, and why they should care. Would love your feedback on that. I would just love your feedback on that. Just let me know. Thank you, everyone. Huge help if you can let me know which of those approaches you like better. And the comment to the full presentation of the other video will be in the comments to this one. Thank you so much.